Let's talk about wide receivers that you should start or sit in week 16 of the fantasy playoffs. You made it. Congratulations to the semifinals. We'll talk through all 32 teams, 16 matchups in total, and I'm sitting down in today's video because it's time to get down to business. All right, so let's start with Thursday Night Football. Broncos at Chargers is a 42.5 point over under. I think there are two clear names I'm going to label an absolute must start in this one. That is Courtland Sutton, who's been on an absolute tear. I mean, since week 8 onwards, he's been one of the best wide receivers in fantasy football, averaging about 9 to 10 targets per game, has a pretty good amount of touchdowns, has been very, very reliable. And we're talking about a Chargers team who just gave up a 30 bomb to Mike Evans. You know, another team that has a good quarterback who, likes to target his number one in the end zone. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, that sounds like Bo Nix and Courtland Sutton. We're going to trust Courtland Sutton. He got you into the fantasy semifinals, and he's going to take you to the next round. On the opposite side of the ball, Ladd McConkey, another name that we're going to trust, a name that we told you to start last week against the Tampa Bay Bucs. He goes out there, has 5 catches, 58 yards, and a touchdown, 7 targets on the day. The Broncos sound like a difficult matchup, but this might sound crazy to you. They are actually the 4th best matchup for your wide receiver when you adjust for schedule. They have been really torn apart. The good news for Ladd McConkey is he plays in the slot a lot, so he doesn't really have to worry about Surtain if Surtain is even healthy for this one. So we're definitely going to start Ladd McConkey. Divisional game, it should be a fun one. And then as far as Quentin Johnston goes, I don't trust him. I know he's coming off a game where he got into the end zone with over 15 points, back-to-back games in the end zone, but that's what he has been this entire season. He's been a boom-bust player. If he scores a touchdown, we've said this all year, great, you'll be happy with it. If he doesn't, he'll completely bust your week, and then we've seen that consistently this entire season. All right, so because there's no college football this week, the NFL decided to put 2 Saturday games on Saturday, right, for the NFL. I don't know how I feel about it. What do you guys think about these Saturday games? I'll always remember the Alvin Kamara 6-touchdown game on Saturday. Maybe we'll see something similar this week. But we've got Texans at Chiefs, the first game on Saturday. Make sure you set your lineups early. Now, this game sounds like a banger, but there might be a little bit of a letdown here. It's tied for the lowest over-under of the week, so Vegas doesn't expect many points. The Texans are favored even though it's at home in Kansas City, and you might ask why. Well, that's because Patrick Mahomes is considered week to week with a mild high ankle sprain. I currently do not project him to play. I don't think it makes sense to put him out there, especially when they have a full game over the Bills for the number 1 seed on a short week. I just don't think he's going to be out there. If he is active, I think Hopkins and Worthy are both decent spot starts, flexible names because the Texans are a top 10 matchup. But, if he's not playing, if he's inactive, I just don't see a reason to trust Carson Wentz. Maybe Carson Wentz is going to revive his career with the Chiefs, right? But it's not something that I want to rely on right now with very little evidence. On the opposite side of the ball, you're going to start Nico Collins with confidence, my wide receiver 3 this week, coming off a 2-touchdown week. I think he has a huge game. The Chiefs are a top 10 matchup for your wide receiver. Their secondary has really been struggling as of recently. So I am confidently putting Nico Collins expecting big things. The last game on Saturday for the NFL is Steelers at Ravens, 46.5 point over under. The Ravens are favored by almost a full touchdown, but it's a divisional game. This could go either way. We know this. These two teams absolutely hate each other, and this game means a lot for the AFC North. So this will be a fun one to watch on Saturday. Now, George Pickens, I currently have him ranked as if he plays. I'm totally aware that there's a good chance he doesn't, right? Has that grade 2 hamstring injury. He didn't play last week. He didn't play the week before. I'm aware that there's a very good chance he does not play in this game. But if he does, I'm going to play him with confidence. With the utmost confidence. He plays the Baltimore Ravens, a top 3 matchup for your wide receiver. Last time he played this team, he had 12 targets, caught 8 of them for 89 yards. So we will play him for sure if he's out there. But if he's not, I don't care. We're not going to play any other Steelers wide receiver. On the opposite side of the ball, I do think Zay Flowers is a must start. I think he probably is a little bit more needed in this game than in previous games. He had a touchdown last time versus the Steelers, but was held to under 40 yards. Rashad Bateman is, kind of taken off, and it's starting to hurt Zay Flowers a little bit. But, we're not really going to trust Rashad Bateman in this matchup, but we are fine to play Zay Flowers. he's just been more consistent over the entirety of the season, right? The wide receiver 14 on the entire season. Rashad Bateman's been less reliable on a week-to-week basis, the wide receiver 36. So if you're going to start one of these guys, I still think the name is Zay Flowers. All right, moving on to the start of the Sunday slate of games. Giants at Falcons, 42.5-point over-under. The Falcons are favored by about 10.5 points. It's the third largest spread of the entire week. Now, for the Giants, you are definitely going to want to start Malik Nabers this week. At this point, I don't think it really matters who the quarterback is. Malik Nabers is going to have a safe floor with a high ceiling. He's going to get you at least 10 points. He's probably going to have over 10 targets, and he's going to have the ceiling of like a 20-point game, just like we saw last week versus Baltimore Ravens. It was a great matchup. He went out there, got a touchdown, over 24 points. Well, now he faces the Atlanta Falcons, which are the number one matchup for your fantasy wide receiver at the time of recording this video. Will it be Tommy? I don't know. Will it be Drew Lock? I don't know. But either way, we're putting Malik Nabers into our lineup. I mean, shoot. At this point, are we sure that Tim Boyle isn't the best answer? He threw the touchdown. On the opposite side of the ball, we are going to start Drake London with a ton of confidence. And I do think Darnell Mooney is a startable name. You know, he is technically labeled a must start, but he's wide receiver 30. That is the last must start in my system. So you could totally put him in that spot start category. In 8 and 10 team leagues, you might want to look elsewhere. But, you know, in your 12 to 16 team leagues, I do think you can put Darnell Mooney into your lineups, a top 24 wide receiver on the season entirely. Now, as far as Drake London goes, of course, you're going to put him into your lineup. And what you have to hope for these wide receivers is that the Giants can keep it competitive. You really have to hope that that happens. Otherwise, you know, there is bust potential here. I definitely recognize that. Moving on to the Patriots at the Bills, 45.5-point over under. This is the largest spread of the week. In fact, it's one of the largest spreads of the entire season, 14.5 points. There are no names I believe you should be starting with your entire life on the line in the fantasy playoffs outside of Khalil Shakir. That is the only name in this entire matchup that I can tell you to start with any sort of confidence. Amari Cooper, we were hesitant last week, right? I know everyone was excited. He came off a 14-target game. Well, last week, the man had no targets. He played 46% of the snaps. It's snip, snap, snip, snap, no consistency. Shakir has been the only consistent name of any wide receiver in this entire matchup. So if you're planning on starting one, it's him. Outside of that, do not get cute. Let's move on to the Cardinals at the Panthers. Okay, so 46.5-point over under. The Cardinals are favored. Marvin Harrison Jr., man, I don't think there's been a more disappointing, wide receiver for the rookies this year. Yeah, there hasn't been. Based off expectations, he's been super disappointing. He faces the Carolina Panthers, which sounds like a good matchup, but actually, typically, teams beat this team on the ground. The Panthers are a bottom 7 matchup for your wide receiver. They typically don't get beat through the air because you don't need to, right? And I'm a little bit concerned about Marvin Harrison this week. He is a spot start. There are certainly worse names that you could go out there and play. He has this kind of ceiling that very few guys do on your roster. But, you have to recognize that there is that bust potential. And as far as the Carolina Panthers go, I still would trust Adam Thielen over Jalen Coker, who last week, had a great game, had 6 targets, caught 4 of them, 110 yards and a touchdown. A lot of that production came from one broken play, whereas Adam Thielen is still like your scripted guy. He had 7 targets, still led the way for the wide receivers. So if you're going to start one of these names, I still trust Adam Thielen, but I do love Jalen Coker as like one of these dynasty darlings that we're stashing. Moving on to the Lions at the Bears. There is potential for the Lions offense to change slightly. Without David Montgomery, there's a chance for them to throw the ball at a higher rate. That's going to be helpful for Amon-Ra St. Brown, who of course is a must start each and every week. That's going to be helpful for Jameson Williams, who got the touchdown last week, has had a pretty decent floor since week 10 coming back from that suspension. Of course, you're going to start Amon-Ra. I think Jameson is a spot start. The issue with Jameson Williams and why he's ranked so low for me is how necessary will he really be? Will the Lions need to throw the ball in the late third, entire fourth quarter against the Chicago Bears? I don't know, and that makes me a little bit cautious. It makes me, really start to question it a little bit there. On the opposite side of the ball, I do think DJ Moore is a very safe, reliable floor. Keenan Allen is a great start as well against the Lions. They're going to need to throw the ball a lot. We said the same thing about the Minnesota Vikings matchup last week for these Chicago Bears. Rome Odunze is getting targets, but they're not connecting. Him and Caleb Williams are not on the same page. That's been the case this entire season. If you're going to start Bears wide receivers, it should be DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, and then we should call it quits and move on with our lives. All right, let's talk Titans at Colts. 43.5 point over under. The only name that I think you can even think about starting in this game is Calvin Ridley. And at this point, I mean, how reliable is Calvin Ridley? The quarterback is changing like the weather. It might be Will Levis. It might be Mason Rudolph. Will Levis is finding new ways to lose games each and every week. If he's a player, are we sure? If he's playing, are we sure we want to trust Calvin Ridley? I mean, Calvin Ridley in the past 3 games has one game over 9 PPR points. Just one single game. So he has been a bust in 3 out of his last 5 games. You know, technically the matchup isn't terrible, but this is kind of Marvin Harrison. As crazy as that sounds, you should view Marvin Harrison, Calvin Ridley the same. 2 alphas on their team, technically, who have this special ceiling that most of the guys on your team don't, but have a floor that could totally destroy you. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, yeah, I mean, we've been saying this all year. We just don't trust Anthony Richardson. We just don't. The man is completing about 44% of his passes this year. Yeah, I don't want to be rude, but at this point, what more is there to say? It's tough to rely on a guy who can't hit a 1-yard pass at this point with any accuracy. It's frustrating to watch. And if you own Josh Downs and Michael Pittman, then you probably watch these games. You know how frustrating it is. Sure, Josh Downs could have a breakaway 80-yard touchdown. But Josh Downs could have 5 targets and one of them were catchable. How are you supposed to rely on that, guys? I think this game will be won through the trenches, specifically with each of these teams' running backs. I think that's how that game will be decided. Moving on, we've got Rams at Jets, 47.5 point over under, the 3rd highest over under of the week. And the complete opposite of the last matchup. In this matchup, we have a ton of names we're going to label must starts. We are going to trust them with our life on the line. For the Rams, that is Puka Nacua, who's been on an absolute tear. I mean, you might have him ranked as a top 2 wide receiver rest of season. I have him as my wide receiver 3 this week. And then Cooper Kupp. Look, I know Cooper Kupp gave you that goose egg last week, but you have to think about the entirety of the season. You can't be so reactionary. I know it's hard to do that in the fantasy playoffs. You think, well, last week he had a goose egg. I can't trust him. Well, guys, from week 8 onwards, he's been one of the better wide receivers in fantasy football. I think that's a bit of an overreaction. We've seen that the Jets can at least keep competitive in games, even though they don't win a lot of their games. I still think Cooper Kupp is someone that you're going to start with some confidence, even though he cost me, he kicked me out of one of the playoffs this in one of my home leagues. So I feel your pain. On the opposite side of the ball, Devontae Adams has been on an absolute tear in the past 3 weeks. He's had a touchdown in each of the last 3 games, including, of course, the 42 bomb versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. All right, now he faces the Rams, a top 10 matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. We're going to start him with confidence. He's averaging over 11 targets per game in the last 3 weeks. And then Garrett Wilson is kind of taking a back seat as of recently, but he's still a startable name, still getting a healthy dose of targets, and still getting those red zone opportunities as well. Moving on to Eagles at Commanders. This is going to be maybe my game of the week. I am a Commanders fan, so there might be some bias there. But I'm very, very curious to see how, if at all, Cliff Kingsbury adjusts to the Philadelphia Eagles defense. Because the last time these 2 teams played on Thursday Night Football, the Eagles had Terry McLaurin in double and triple coverage the entire night. There was not a single moment where he was, given an opportunity to shine. But Cliff made no adjustments to get him these easy layup targets. Now, how can you sit Terry McLaurin, right? I have very low expectations. That's why he's not ranked inside my top 20 after being ranked inside my top 12 for most of the year. But he's the wide receiver 5 on the season. Since week 3, he's only busted once in week 11 versus Philadelphia. To be fair, that was in Philadelphia. This is at Washington. Those kind of mental things I do think matter a little bit. And I'm believing that Cliff Kingsbury is going to make some slight adjustments here to try and, fix his mistakes last time out. But I will recognize that there is bust potential for Terry McLaurin. But at this point, I want to start whoever got me there, and that is Terry McLaurin, the wide receiver 5 on the season. On the opposite side of the ball, of course, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, these are 2 guys that you can start with a ton of confidence. We saw A.J. Brown kind of complain about the passing attack, and then they went out there and targeted A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith a lot. It was very concentrated target share for these two guys. So we'll see if that trend continues in this game. But what I will say is don't be surprised if one of these guys bust, because Marshawn Lattimore is looking like a shutdown corner. He will be really, truly tested for the first time this week as a Washington Commander against these Eagles wide receivers. But you got two secondaries that are giving up the fewest points per game to wide receivers, but you got a bunch of superstar names. So it's a really tough situation. I don't blame you if you're struggling. You can check out the pinned comment if you want to ask me a specific question through our website, but I still think you got to start these stars. Keep it simple, stupid. Start your superstars. That's what we say to ourselves. All right, moving on. We've got Browns at Bengals. This is the highest over-under of the week, so we are expecting a lot of fantasy points in this matchup. The Bengals are favored by almost a full touchdown, so we should see a ton of points from your Joe Burrows, your Jamar Chase, your T. Higgins. Those guys are all must-starts on a weekly basis. Nothing is going to change in this matchup against the Cleveland Browns. They're a top 12 matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. Here's what I will say is, for the Browns wide receivers, if Jameis Winston starts, we're starting Jerry Jeudy with a ton of confidence, just like we said last week. All right, Jameis Winston had a terrible game last week, but still, Jerry Jeudy had 14 targets, caught 11 of them for 108 yards. Now, and you've seen how good Jerry Jeudy's been with Jameis Winston, guys. In his first 7 games without Jameis Winston, 266 yards. In his last 7 games with Jameis Winston, 786 yards. It's been a complete turnaround. But if Dorian Thompson-Robinson is a starter, it will completely ruin everything. I promise you. I will have no confidence in any wide receiver in Cleveland if it's Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So you better be praying to the fantasy gods that they give Jameis at least one more opportunity this week in a great matchup against the Bengals. He could smash, but yeah, this is a sticky situation we're going to have to monitor throughout the entire week. All right, let's move on to the start of the 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games, starting off with Vikings at Seahawks. Of course, you're going to start Justin Jefferson, right? We don't really need to waste our breath with that. Coming off a pretty decent game against the Chicago Bears, 13 targets, caught 7 of them for 73 yards and a touchdown. Jordan Addison is a decent, flexible name. He did have 9 targets last week versus Chicago. Unfortunately, they just didn't really need to throw the ball that much in the second half, so that kind of hurt his upside. But you have the Seahawks, who are a top 10 matchup. Yes, both of these guys are playable names. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, we actually have a similar situation to what we had in Cleveland this week, which is, will the starting quarterback be there? All right. According to McDonald, the head coach over there, McDonald, with the Seahawks, he says he's hopeful that Geno Smith will practice this week. But that doesn't mean that Geno will. It doesn't mean that Geno will play. So my rankings are currently ranked as if Geno does play. If he does play, of course, we're going to start JSN. Of course, we're going to start DK Metcalf. They would be fantastic plays if Geno is healthy. But if Geno Smith is not healthy and it's Sam Howell, I would definitely start asking some questions. I would definitely start looking at your roster and seeing if you have alternate options, because Sam Howell looked completely lost last week. As a Washington fan, I was getting flashbacks with the amount of sacks that he took. And I would just be very, very cautious. All right, 13th matchup we have here is the Jags at the Raiders. Two teams that are terrible. It's tied for the lowest over-under of the week. The Jags are underdogs, oddly enough, in this game. But Brian Thomas is a must-start. I was a little bit concerned about him last week. I'm not even going to front. With Mac Jones. I just didn't trust Mac Jones. But he went out there and absolutely balled out, had over 32 points. He is that dude. We loved him so much coming out of the 2024 class, one of our favorite prospects, and he continues to prove why he is an alpha wide receiver in this league. Now he gets to play the Raiders. I do think you can play him. He seems to be their only consistent weapon on offense. On the opposite side of the ball, I'd love to sit here and tell you that you can start Jacoby Myers with a ton of confidence, but it really comes down to quarterback play. And right now, if we are expecting Desmond Ridder to come out there and play quarterback again, I'm just not so sure what sort of ceiling there is for a Jacoby Myers at this point. So proceed with caution. If Aiden O'Connell's out there, and starting, you can play Jacoby Myers with confidence. If it's Desmond Ridder, I would lower your expectations. 14th matchup we'll look at here is the 49ers at the Dolphins. Juwan Jennings is my only must start in this matchup. Deebo Samuel, you know, I'm kind of like out of respect for his fantasy career, putting him as a spot start. But we have been encouraging you guys not to start him for the last couple of weeks. He's been on multiple of our bust videos, you know, multiple time appearances. You know, he complained about getting opportunities, and then he got opportunities, and he was terrible with them. You know, he had 7 targets. It was really, really rough to watch. It was not fun at all to see. But of course, I still think he has this crazy ceiling that, you know, any game he could kind of pop off and figure it out again. But Juwan Jennings is the only one that I trust. Throw away last week's game. The weather was not something that we expected to be a problem. He still had 9 targets. You're going to trust Juwan Jennings. On the opposite side of the ball, I do not project Jalen Waddle to play. He's technically day-to-day with his injury, but I just don't trust that he's going to be out there playing in a reliable name at this point, so I have not ranked him. And I have put Tyreek Hill as a must-start, a top 22 name for me in my rankings this week. Totally fine to put him out there. You know, obviously, we recognize that there is a high ceiling, but certainly a floor that is concerning with Tyreek Hill. That's just the nature of the Dolphins this year. All right, 2 more games. Second to last one is Sunday Night Football, Bucs at Cowboys. I'm very excited for this game. It's the second highest over-under of the week. A lot of fantasy lives on the line will be determined by this game here. I'm really excited to watch it. Mike Evans, an absolute must-start. You know, he's the wide receiver 16 on the season despite missing 3.5 games with an injury. And he needs to average about 84 receiving yards per game to get to that 1,000-yard mark. I definitely think that's on his mind. I definitely think Baker Mayfield wants to help him get there as well. And now he faces the Cowboys, who are a top 12 matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. No Trevon Diggs. You know, they got injuries on their defense. I think Mike Evans, of course, another smash start. How about my guy, Jalen McMillan, though? Is anybody out there from our Dynasty channel loving what we're seeing from Jalen McMillan? 3 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. He's starting to break out. I don't think you can trust him just yet, but of course, if you're in this serious desperation spot, I think there are worse plays out there. And then CeeDee Lamb, it was great to see him bounce back with Cooper Rush. You know, in the last 2 weeks, he had a bad game in week 13, but in week 14 and 15, both of these games over 20 PPR points, got into the end zone. Cooper Rush has been very competent. It's the second best matchup for your wide receiver. The Bucs are favored, assuming, you know, that the Cowboys are going to be down needing to throw the ball. I think CeeDee Lamb should have a huge, huge day. And we're going to finish off this video with Monday Night Football, Saints at Packers. For the Saints, even if Chris Olave comes back, I don't care. I'm not starting any of these names. I don't know who's going to play quarterback. You know, it was Jake Haener, then it was Spencer Rattler. It's an absolute mess there. I don't trust any of these names. MVS's superpower has been cut off with no Derek Carr. It's messy. I just don't trust it. It's also the second largest spread of the week in favor of the Packers. In fact, if the Packers defense is still out there on your waivers, they're one of the better defensive plays this week. So definitely go check that out. If you're going to start a Packer wide receiver, I still would start Jaden Reed over anybody else. But at this point, you know, it feels like every week it's someone new for the Green Bay Packers. So I'm not wanting to trust these names if I have more reliable options in my lineup. I appreciate you guys for watching the video. Do me a favor, hit that like button to show some love. Subscribe if you like the content. If you want to reach me and ask me a fantasy question, you can check out the pinned comment. You can reach me on our website at any moment. And here's what I'll say. We will not be doing content next week. Why? Because it's a holiday for us, all right? It's a vacation. We take 2 weeks off out of the year. So this is our last week making content, but you can still reach us on the Flock Fantasy website if you want to ask us a question with the pinned comment. And while you're over there, if you haven't created a free account yet, use the promo code LAND to get a free account, and you'll get a bunch of free features, which is really, really cool. I appreciate you watching the video. Running back video is already out. We'll see you soon. All love. Let's go win some championships. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.